Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of MFP Live. I'm Donna Ladd. I'm the editor of the Mississippi Free Press, and I am really tickled tonight to have my partner in the Mississippi Free Press, the publisher Kimberly Griffin, is here with us. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello.
Happy Women's History Month.
I know. It's been a great month so far.
I know. And tonight's show is perfect for this. And I kind of want to mention, in case I forget later on, that we're going to be going weekly, at least through this month, every Thursday night at 6 p.m. So think about us. And if that goes well, we're probably going to keep it weekly. So Kimberly, I'm going to kick it to you and let you introduce our fabulous guest tonight.
I am so excited. I've been saying all week that I have two of the smartest women I know on tonight, and that is Dr. Kimberly Smash, who is a board-certified family medicine doctor, and Dr. Nina Washington, who is a pediatric rheumatologist, a specialty within a specialty. And they are so dear to me, both of them, and have made such an impact on our community. I wanted to have them sit down during Women's History Month to talk about the impact of COVID in the Black community. And I'm just going to jump right in and talk about one of the things that comes up in every conversation with Black folks all across the diaspora. Are you taking the vaccine? Are you not taking the vaccine? I'm scared to take the vaccine. I don't know about the vaccine. I'm frightened. But then I saw Nina took the vaccine. Like, these are texts I get, you know. So we spoke to a 77-year-old woman in Jackson yesterday who says she did not trust the vaccine and may not take it. I'm going to kick this first to Dr. Smash. Talk about vaccine hesitancy in the community and where does it come from?
So first of all, thank you all for having me on this show. I really appreciate it. I consider it an honor that you're sharing your platform with me tonight. So I'm grateful for that. But yes, vaccine hesitancy is a very real thing. And as you know, from our history here in America as Black people, there are a lot of things that have made us definitely more hesitant to get the COVID-19 vaccine than the rest of the population. And one of the things that continues to sort of surface when talking about vaccine hesitancy is what's called the Tuskegee experiment, or some people call it the syphilis study. And people have referenced moments like that in our history that, of course, would make anyone hesitant to trust the healthcare system. But when I think about the Tuskegee experiment or the syphilis study, I think about what truly happened during that time in America's history. And so what really happened was that people, men, Black men, and in Tuskegee, Alabama, thought that they were getting health care. They thought that they were being treated for syphilis, the disease that the experiment was named after, or that the experiment was named after. But they really were not getting the treatment. They were actually withholding the treatment, which at about 10 to 15 years after the experiment started, or the syphilis study started, penicillin became available and totally cured syphilis. And so they thought that they were going to get the same treatment. And so unfortunately, the access to that particular treatment was withheld because they wanted to see the progression of syphilis in the Black community and see what it did to the body. So those men who thought that they were getting the treatment for syphilis really were not. And so when things like that happen in our community, you can understand why there is a lack of trust in our community when it comes to the government, especially providing things like vaccine on this grand scale. And so I have done, as much as I can with my patients to sort of allay some of those fears, but those fears are very real. And I try to make sure that my patients understand that it's okay for them to feel that, But I think it's our job as healthcare professionals to make sure that they understand that it's not about you getting a different medicine than another population or them injecting you with something, because those have been tales that have gone along throughout our history. But it's more about us not having access to the medicines and the treatments that are available. And so now that the treatment and the vaccine, the medication is available, I urge my patients as much as possible to take advantage of it because there are so many benefits.
Dr. Washington, we've had this conversation about vaccine hesitancy, and I was hesitant to take the vaccine for a number of reasons. For, the fact that often studies don't include adequate African American, people of color, Asian, Latinx populations, some concern there. Why is this vaccine safe, Dr. Washington? Why do you consider it safe?
That's actually an excellent question, because I think a lot of the concerns about the vaccine and a lot of the fears of the vaccine is because people are not familiar with what actually took place to get this vaccine approved. So the Moderna and the Pfizer studies had 30 to 40,000 participants who were enrolled in these trials. And if you think about vaccines that were made prior to the COVID vaccine, those vaccines actually were only able to enroll about 10 to 20,000 people. And so we know that we've tested the vaccines on a good amount of people to, one, prove that they're safe, and to two, prove that they are effective. The other reason why I feel strongly that the vaccines are safe is because there was a collective effort. There have been very few, if any, times in history where the whole world has been going through the same thing. So this wasn't an American problem. This wasn't a European problem. This wasn't an Asian problem. This was a pandemic. It affected the whole world. And because of that, everyone had some skin in the game. And when you have skin in the game, you can make investments. So there was money that was contributed. There were investments that were made. And unfortunately, usually in medicine and in the development of vaccines, we're not able to obtain the funds that are needed to push a vaccine approval as quickly as the COVID vaccine was. And so for those two majority reasons, one, it was tested in enough participants, and two, we had the adequate capital to test it and make sure that it was safe. I feel very comfortable in saying that it's an effective and safe vaccine.
And Dr. Smash, you can answer this, or we can kick it back to Dr. Washington. Can you talk about the science of the vaccine? I do not speak science, but it felt, from what I understand, we were a little ahead because of some building blocks that were already established for this kind of vaccine.
So, yes, the science behind the vaccine is just so incredible to me. The new technology, and I call it new because there's never been a vaccine that has been created using this technology. Now, having said that, it's really not new technology. The mRNA vaccine is not new at all. They've actually been using mRNA technology for a long time in treating cancer and developing treatments that actually target the cancer cells. And so mRNA technology has been around long enough so they understand how it actually affects the cell. And so the only thing that happens is the scientists get a piece of the genetic material from the COVID-19 virus, and they take that, and it's called RNA, which is mRNA, the messenger RNA, and it has a message in it to tell it when it gets into our cell to actually code or create a protein that will help our bodies to recognize that that is foreign. And so once our bodies recognize that that's a foreign object that it's created, then our body starts to create an immune response so that we're able to fight off COVID-19 if it ever tries to invade our bodies again. And that little protein, that genetic material, that mRNA allows our bodies to produce, is called the spike protein. And I know everyone has heard a lot about the spike protein. And that's the protein that's on the surface of the virus that allows it to attach to our cells. So that's what makes it infectious. And so that the fact that our bodies recognize that should not be a part of our cells, it allows us to use that mRNA technology that has created that foreign spike protein and not actually get the disease, but create the immune response that we need in order to protect us in the future.
Thank you for explaining that. I feel like I understand it finally.
I know, right?
So let's talk a little bit about the Black healthcare community and how you guys have been working tirelessly trying to educate us. I'm a person of extreme privilege. I have Dr. Washington is one of my dearest friends. I have 2 cousins that are MDs. I have various friends that are MDs. I can text 10 people if I become panicked at a doctor's office, I just start texting people and say, you have to talk to this person. I don't know what you're talking about. And so I became more comfortable when people I loved and trusted, people that were close to me, people that I admired from afar, began to get the vaccine. And that's when I said, well, if these 10 people can get the vaccine that I know, love, and trust me, love me and care about our community, but everyone doesn't have that access. Everyone doesn't have that point of privilege. Talk to us about what you've seen, what you all are talking about behind the scenes, and what you're trying to do in the community I know, Dr. Smash, you talked about, I'm telling my patients to do this, but are you doing anything at church? Are you doing it? I see a lot of folks are getting vaccinated on social media. I'm going to kick this over to Dr. Washington and just tell us what your community is doing.
Yeah, so my community is varied, and I would first like to lead with, even I was skeptical. I had to do my research when the vaccine first came out. I was concerned that it was an emergency use. I was concerned that we didn't know how long the immunity would last. I had a number of concerns, and the things that persuaded me were just as you said, Kimberly. So health professionals that I know intimately and that I trust and I value their opinion, I saw them starting to get the vaccine. And I think those same things are happening in the Black community. In as much as social media can be a thorn in our side, social media has also helped and hurt with that. So obviously you have the conspiracy theories that go on with regards to the vaccine. But I think for the Black community, seeing more of their social network saying, I got the vaccine and hey, I'm doing okay. I think that's helping the Black community. I also think that those messages that we get in our inboxes, in fact, I posted about I posted about the most recent CDC guidelines. And sure enough, I got messages from Black people in my inbox saying, okay, all right, sis, I'm ready. Can you answer these questions for me? And so there's still an amount of uncertainty that I think can be assuaged by more education, which is why webinars and seminars such as the one we're doing tonight are so important. And then also when it comes to the Black church, I think that Black people have a lot of trust in their clergy. They trust their pastors. They trust the mothers of the church. They trust their choir members. And so a lot of pastors have taken the helm and said, hey, this is how we protect our community. Black and brown people, we're the ones who are dying the most from COVID-19. This is how we continue to save lives, is that we take the vaccine. And in fact, in some of the research that I was doing for tonight's presentation, there's actually been grants that have been given to a number of Black churches to become COVID-19 vaccine centers and to become educational centers for the COVID vaccine to answer those questions that people still have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we've got 3 approved vaccines at this point. When I originally wrote this question, we had 2. What should people know? Does it make a difference? I'm actually going to go back to Dr. Washington because you deal with a lot of folks with underlying health conditions. Is there one that seems to be better or worse? So we understand this is not medical advice.
Okay, that's our disclaimer.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I would say, and I want to lead with this, I'll lead with this and I'll end with this. If you have the opportunity to get the vaccine, get the vaccine. This is not like picking Coke, Pepsi, or Dr. Pepper. If you can get the vaccine, get the vaccine. So I'll lead with that, and I'll likely end with that as well. The other thing is that we can't compare Moderna and Pfizer with the J&J or the Janssen vaccine because they were done at two completely different times. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was done at the height of the pandemic. This was also the time that we saw the variants start to come into play. And so when that vaccine was tested, it wasn't testing just the vaccine. I'm sorry, it wasn't testing just the coronavirus that we started with in March of 2020. It was the coronavirus from March of 2020 all the way to the end. And then let's wrap on around to 2021. And now we have new variants. And so a lot of people have been concerned about the fact that Moderna and Pfizer have 90 or greater than 90% efficacy, and the Johnson & Johnson has about 60 to 70% efficacy. But again, if you look at things like the flu vaccine that we get every year only has about a 30 to 40% efficacy. So no matter which vaccine you take, you're already doing better than that annual flu vaccine that you get. And so I think people really shouldn't be concerned about whether they get Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson. They're all effective vaccines. And if you can get one, get one. And that's from the heart.
Dr. Washington, could you define the word efficacy for us? What does that mean?
Efficacy. So when you're testing a drug or a medication, you have outcomes. And so each outcome is defined in the study. And so for the efficacy trials for the vaccines, their outcomes were, would people get the disease? Would they get symptomatic disease? Would they have to be hospitalized, or would they die? And so they found that for 90 to 95% of Moderna and Pfizer, those things did not happen, 90 to 95%. So that's the efficacy. And the same with Johnson & Johnson. So the efficacy is how much you reach that outcome you were looking for.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Smash, we know that COVID has revealed some disparities in the Black community. Can you talk about what you've seen in your practice and how those disparities have played out as we try to fight this pandemic?
So, as we all know, and we've heard many times in the media and have read, of course, as well, unfortunately, COVID-19 affects the Black community disproportionately compared to other communities. And so the things that have been found that put us at a higher risk of severe COVID-19 infection and even death from COVID-19 infection are the comorbidities such as high blood pressure, diabetes, being overweight with a BMI, which is a body mass index of over 30. And so those things, even before COVID-19, the pandemic hit, those things were already more prevalent in the Black community. And so I just think with the onslaught of the pandemic, it has just magnified the fact that there are health disparities, unfortunately, that predispose the Black community to having those comorbidities. And so there is a little bit of contention, I guess, now in the healthcare community about what is it that actually predisposes Black people to those comorbidities. And that is what we need to address as a healthcare community. And some people have even speculated that it's really not just the lifestyle of the Black community, but it could actually be because of the systemic racism that we face every day. Just the stress of normal life could be the foundational issue for why those comorbidities are so prevalent in our community.
Dr. Smash, I want to follow up on that. We're at the MFP, we're working with the Jackson Advocate to do what we're calling a it's Equity and Resilience, Black Women in COVID-19 project. The point of the project is to actually try to get at the existing conditions, systemic problems that probably made COVID-19 so much worse on particularly Black women in the early months. in Mississippi. And exactly what you're saying, that we're looking at, that we're trying to dig in deeper to conditions, access to hospitals, or access to wellness issues, or even getting into things like labor and pay, and those kind of conditions. So what I guess I'm curious from you, or Dr. Washington as well, is, even if it's guessing, from your perspective, what do you think are the systemic issues that are probably the most connected, beyond the morbidities? I can never say that word. That would actually set women up for that situation. In other words, I'm being too wordy here. What is it that Black women in particular face in Mississippi that that you think contributed to COVID being so bad for them in early months?
So I'll go ahead and answer that, and I don't think that I have the complete and total answer. This is something
understood. Yeah.
But I guess what I'll do is I'll start by telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this old African-American folklore about a man named, and I know we're talking about women, but this sort of pertains to Black women and men. But there's a man named John Henry. And I don't know if you all have heard that folklore about John Henry. He's supposed to be this Black man who beat the machine, so to speak. He won by working hard against the machine. And so basically the machine itself was a steel drill. And what happened was John Henry was the steel worker, and he was known in the community for working hard and always having a hammer in his hand, because he was always tirelessly working. And so the boss of John Henry actually brought in this steel drill, the steam drill, and he brought in the machine and said, I am going to let this steam drill outwork you. And so John made a point to himself that he was not going to let the machine, the steam drill, outwork him. And so the story goes that he works and works against this machine, the steam drill, and eventually he wins against the steam drill. But at the end, he actually passes out from exhaustion, and then he dies. And so the machine, the steam drill, is actually supposed to represent the stress that Black men and women live under every day. So the stress of the social inequalities, the stress of the lack of access to healthcare, the stress of systemic racism, and the things that have been sort of baked into our system, like redlining, that put people in poor communities and have, because of that, they have food deserts, and so they don't have access to healthy food. So there's no way that they could live a healthy lifestyle. So fighting against all these things, that's the machine. And so eventually we work so hard as Black men and women to overcome that and just, live our lives, that eventually we end up with aging faster and developing more comorbidities such as diabetes and high blood pressure, because of that added stress that other communities don't have to deal with, and then end up dying at an earlier age. And so I think what we have to work toward getting more knowledge about is finding out what those things are. Specifically, you're talking about Black women, what those things are that we can address, that have been, quote unquote, baked in, that are affecting not only the community at large, but on an individual level, people developing those diseases like diabetes and high blood pressure.
Brilliant story. Thank you so much for that. I'm curious, Dr. Washington, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And in addition to that, I would add two things. So at the top of the talk, we were discussing things in the American history, such as the Tuskegee syphilis study. And another injustice that was done to Black people, and in this instance, because your question was framed around Black women, were the obstetric and the gynecological studies that were done. And unfortunately, these studies were done on Black women and often Black slaves without anesthesia, because it was felt that Black women could sustain more levels of pain or could tolerate more levels of pain. And so unfortunately, these poor women had all of these procedures done on them without any pain control. And unfortunately, that has carried out through our time. Black women, Black people in general are felt to have lower levels, or rather I should say higher thresholds for pain. And so I think that might be one reason why Black women in Mississippi have suffered more, is from the implicit bias that, oh, well, you're a Black woman, you say you hurt, you say you can't breathe, you say you're sick, but you look really well to me, you know? And so I think that has something to do with it. In addition to that, one of the things that I always taught, and I'm a pediatrician, I'm a pediatric rheumatologist. And so while I deal with taking care of children, I also take care of the family, because who takes care of the child who has a chronic illness? Their parent. And so I always taught my parents and my patients to learn how to advocate for themselves. And unfortunately, a lot of Black people don't know how to be an advocate. I'll take my sister, for example. My younger sister, when she was seeing a doctor in a city that she first moved to in Dallas, my sister didn't realize that there is always a doctor on call. She didn't realize that if something was happening to her outside of 9 to 5, that there was an avenue that you could reach a doctor. And so a lot of Black people don't realize that, hey, I don't understand what the doctor said. I can actually challenge you on that. Everything can be done in a respectful way. But if you go to a physician and you think you have COVID, and that physician says, well, you don't look like you have COVID, a lot of people don't know, Black people specifically, that, you know what, I'm not taking that for an answer. I know my body, I know how I feel, and I need you to help me. And so I think those two have definitely played a role in some of the things that we've seen in COVID and the Black community.
Well, and we're throwing up right now. We have a column up that's about, if people want to go read this, that's about specifically the horror stories that you're talking about the experiments that were done on Black women and enslaved women. It's horrifying. And then for people who might not know, there's also the fact, the forced sterilization, such as Fannie Lou Hamer had right up in Ruleville. And I, speaking as the white woman on the panel, I can say that a lot of white people are surprised by these stories, because they just haven't run into them to know the extent of the problem of the bias against, assuming that Black people, Black women can take more pain. I've done a lot of reading on that in recent years, but it took me a long time to understand that and to start having conversations about it. But it is important to understand this about our medical system. So thank you. I mean, for bringing that up. I mean, that's just urgent. Kimberly, you can take it back.
Well, and I have something that I see that is concerning to me. Dr. Smash is slightly younger than me. I didn't realize that we went to high school together. I think maybe I was leaving and you were coming. Yeah, we did. So we almost were there at the same time until very recently, when some of my classmates got so excited that you have a practice. And so one of the things, and Nina is, I think, a decade younger than I am, but we grew up in a time when there were really good cores of Black community to rely on. And we sort of all lived in the same place. We sort of all went to the same places. And there would be people in your community that would be MDs, PhDs, janitors, nurses. There'd be every part of the community was at church together. And I see us getting more and more separated. So if there was a problem, because I grew up in Mount Helm, then whoever would come to church and they would find the Black doctor if they hadn't been able to talk to him that week, and they would say, here's everything that's going on and I need your help. I think one of the issues that we are facing is our community is now so segmented for reasons of opportunity. People leave Mississippi because there's better opportunity, and they don't necessarily find the same community that they had here. So for me, what are ways that we can continue to be connected? And when I say that, I mean beyond social media. What are ways that our community can and find those resources like Dr. Smash, like Dr. Washington, like all the wonderful African American doctors that are boots on the ground right now? What are some ways we can make sure our elders have that advocate?
You'd like me to take this one? Or you want to?
I say Dr. Smash first and then Dr. Washington.
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. And I have actually struggled with that after I moved back home from Michigan, where I was for almost a decade. And so just trying to find who I am able to connect with in the community has actually been a struggle, even for me as a doctor. And so that is going to be a hard question for me to answer. But I still believe that church is still one of the places where, especially our elderly, can have access to their doctors and, like you said, the nurses and all of the people who have information that can help them. And so, and I just speak specifically from my experience in the church where I am, where my husband is an assistant pastor. I have done multiple videos, getting out information to our congregation about COVID-19. And actually, we're planning on doing a vaccine drive, hopefully soon, when I'm able to get the allocations for the vaccines at my office. And so I really believe that the answer to that is still within the local church and connecting the elderly to services that they need. Now, whether or not the local churches are doing our part in order to get the information out to the elderly, then that's a whole nother story. There may be other avenues that we need to use in order to pull our elderly patients in, because right now, since a lot of churches are virtual and a lot of elderly patients or elderly members don't have access to Zoom and all these other virtual platforms, then it may be more difficult now to get our elderly involved and help them be more informed. But I still, like I said, I believe that the church is going to be the center of bringing people together.
Yeah, I'm glad you kicked that off to Dr. Smash, because I think she answered it beautifully, and she said many of the things I would say. So I'll let it stand at that.
So, thank you. So, Dr. Washington, one of the reasons I said that I wanted to have you on is that you treat rheumatological issues, which are prevalent in the Black community. And it wasn't until I met you that I understood everything that was a rheumatological issue. Like, I thought it was arthritis. I didn't know.
Can I say that I still think that? So you guys may have to.
Well, it would be.
You may have to educate me slightly.
Okay, we'll do.
So I think, first of all, if you'll tell us what kind of conditions does a rheumatologist treat, and then maybe talk a little bit about what we know about underlying conditions and the long-term effects of COVID on people with chronic diseases if you've had COVID.
Okay. So the first thing I'll answer is, what are rheumatologic diseases? And I think the most, or rather I should say, the two most popular ones that people think of are lupus, because I think lupus has really come on the scene because so many famous people have it. Toni Braxton, Nick Cannon, I believe Snoop Dogg's daughter has lupus, so that one, and also arthritis. But when we think about rheumatologic illnesses, we think about the illnesses of the immune system that cause autoimmunity. So the way I always explained it to my patients is that your immune system is your inner army, and your immune system is supposed to attack anything that comes in to invade the body. So whether that's a virus, whether that's bacteria, if you cut yourself, the immune system fixes all of that. Well, in rheumatologic illnesses, for some reason, the immune system says, protecting the body is a little boring. How about we attack the body? And so from that, you get things like low blood counts, you get hair loss, you get rashes, you get arthritis, and all of those things encompass the rheumatologic world. One, I would say, misconception about rheumatologic illnesses is anything that's autoimmune is rheumatologic. And that's not necessarily true, because autoimmunity can affect many areas of the body. If you're familiar with things like inflammatory bowel disease, or if you're familiar with things like autoimmune hepatitis. So those are instances where the immune system attacks the gut and the GI system or the liver, but they're not necessarily rheumatologic in nature. So one way I always think about rheumatology is if it affects the skin, the joints, the organs, and they kind of all run together, then that's likely a rheumatologic issue. So that would answer what rheumatology is. And I do that as a pediatric rheumatologist. And about 300,000 children in the United States have some form of arthritis or a rheumatologic illness. Now, when it comes to COVID, the initial concern was that people with rheumatologic illnesses would fare worse than those in the general population. But from the studies that we have so far, we know that it's not necessarily the disease itself that makes you fare worse, but more likely if you are on steroids, because steroids are often used to treat rheumatologic illnesses. Because remember, that army is kind of going out of control. It's going crazy. And so steroids are one of the things we do to kind of get the army to calm down. And so in studies that were done, they found that patients who were on more than 10 milligrams of prednisone a day, those patients tend to be the ones with COVID who were more hospitalized and the ones who had worse outcomes. As far as the sequelae from the coronavirus, I can't necessarily say that it is much different from the general population. I think one of the bigger concerns is a disease flare if someone gets the coronavirus or COVID-19. But as far as the severe sequelae, unfortunately, if you are a patient who gets severe COVID-19, then those likely look the same in the rheumatologic patients as the general population.
Okay.
And if you'll allow me, one thing I do want to speak to that has come to knowledge, and it's very close to the rheumatologic world, is this issue of MISC, so multi-system inflammatory syndrome, and that's in children. But they've also seen that this happens in adults. Now, I'm going to try not to get too technical, but in rheumatologic patients, it can often happen that their bodies are creating so much inflammation that it overwhelms the system. And when this happens, organs start to fail. So the heart can fail, the kidneys can fail, the liver can fail, the blood counts plummet. But what they found in COVID patients, especially children, when these children are sick with COVID 4 to 6 weeks later, and these are not rheumatologic patients, these are the general population, 4 to 6 weeks after these children have COVID, some of them are asymptomatic. They almost look like patients who have a rheumatologic illness who are experiencing this increase in inflammation. And so the world of rheumatology has come in very handy in taking care of those children who have contracted COVID and a month down the line start to look like more of what we see in rheumatology patients with a lot of inflammation.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so
I'm
much.
smarter now. I learned a lot from that. Thank you.
That was so helpful. So, Dr. Smash, I'm going to kick it over to you. Can you tell us what we know about persisting symptoms, persisting issues with adults that have had COVID? I know it hadn't been long, but what do we know now about some of the things they're having to deal with that continue to affect them?
So it's actually very common that people have long-lasting symptoms after they get the initial infection with COVID-19. And they have even come up with a name for them. They call them the long haulers. And so the long haulers have been known to have many, many different types of long-term reactions to having been infected. And so one of the most common ones is that people end up having long-term lung disease. So they just sort of feel short of breath. These are previously active, healthy people, even athletes who no longer can perform like they used to because just a little bit of activity takes their breath away. And so there I actually have patients who are still on oxygen who were previously healthy after being diagnosed with COVID-19. And I don't know if you guys remember when Dr. Fauci even mentioned, was it Dr. Fauci? No, it was then President Biden who mentioned that COVID-19 may become the next pre-existing condition, meaning that, you know, most people have thought that once I get COVID-19 infection, if I'm healthy, I'll get over it and all is well. But we're finding that these long haulers are more prevalent. And so these people end up with autoimmune symptoms like Dr. Washington was talking about. They end up with the long-term lung problems. They end up with memory loss. They call it a brain fog. So it's hard for them to focus and concentrate. There are even patients who have more heightened anxiety and depression than they ever had before. And so there are just so many effects of COVID-19 that seem to be persisting for longer than people once expected. So this is another reason to get the vaccine and to follow all of the public health guidelines so that you don't get infected and possibly end up with something that you'll be battling for many months to come.
Thank you. Dr. Smash, we did have a question, and this is something a lot of people talk about. One of our viewers said that she experienced symptoms after her second dose of the vaccine, and she wants to know why.
So you can experience symptoms even after the first dose of the vaccine. However, more people seem to develop symptoms after that second dose because your immune system has already sort of been revved up by the first vaccine. And so when you get that boost with the second one, your body's like, okay, I'm ready to fight. And so you get that second vaccine. And so now all those immune cells that are there to protect you, to help your body learn how to fight the COVID-19 infection, they are at the helm and they're ready. And they start to actually cause your body to react a lot sooner than with the very first dose. And so that's why more people experience symptoms with the second dose, is because your body is just doing what it's supposed to do.
Thank you. Dr. Washington, another question that I think someone messaged me this earlier in the week. So these variants, they're variants that, you know, we're used to flu variants. What's going to happen? And I'm asking you to use your crystal ball. I'm sorry.
No pressure.
No pressure. No pressure. No pressure, Dr. Washington.
Whoa.
Do we anticipate boosters? Will the current vaccine protect us from serious health incidents? How are we moving in the world if you've been vaccinated and you're encountering these variants?
So I think the first thing I would say, and you kind of already said it, that's really a crystal ball question. And I honestly do not know the definitive answer to that. What I can say, however, is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine should be encouragement that we will have treatments that will allow us to address the variants that are happening. So remember, I said earlier that the reason that we can't compare Moderna and Pfizer to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that the vaccines were tested and developed at completely different times. And so what we were able to see was with that Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it was effective against some of the variants. And so my hope is that just like with the flu vaccine, as we learn more about the vaccines for COVID, as we learn more about COVID and coronavirus in and of itself, that we will have more treatments to test to treat the variants.
So let's just, I want to take a moment to talk about data. And Donna has these numbers better at her fingertips than I do, but about close 28% is changing every day of the vaccines have gone to African Americans in the state of Mississippi. seems like a decent number. Doesn't seem like the worst number. Could be better. What's our population, African American population in Mississippi, Donna?
The
Yeah,
proportion's about 38%. And so
38%.
that is a pretty good lag,
Yeah.
you know, in that.
What could the state have done better to
Mhm.
get vaccines to Black communities or any communities dealing with health disparities? And I'll go with Dr. Smash.
Well, I really think that we were all learning. Okay, right? This was a brand new vaccine. None of us have ever lived through a pandemic, and nobody really understood how the response and the rollout of the vaccine should go. However, I guess we can speak specifically about Mississippi. I noticed when the vaccine locations first rolled out in Mississippi, and I'm sure everybody is aware of this, they were really not in the areas that were hardest hit with COVID-19. And so I know the very first two locations that I was aware of, because I was trying to search for a location for myself because I knew I wanted to get the vaccine. But the very first locations that I noticed were Madison County and Rankin County. And we all know that Hinds County has really, really been one of the hardest hit counties. And so I think that was one of the things that could have been done better, is that they could have focused more on the areas that were hardest hit prior to providing the vaccines in those other counties. But I think that they've since made up for that.
Well, one of the things I noticed is that, and I still think it's a problem, is access being specifically online, which is a problem for, there's not just elders, but the connectivity issues in rural communities, not having adequate cell phone service. Not many people, their cell phone is their computer. That's hard to navigate that vaccine portal on a phone. I mean, my parents just called me and told me to get them an appointment. Well, we're people of privilege. They're like, get us an appointment, and they hung up the phone. But, you know, everyone didn't have that opportunity. Say a little more about that, Dr. Washington.
Yeah, so I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I would add to that, I think that even the phone system was not as optimal and effective as it could be. So there were many people, elderly, who do have landlines, and even when they called, they were unable to get an appointment because the public health department, the state, just did not anticipate how much people would desire these vaccines. So I think that was an issue. And I also think that education and the manpower. So for instance, I'm going to take a page out of Dr. Smash's book here and tell a story. I had to go to the pharmacy last week for a un-COVID related prescription. And there was an elderly lady in front of me who asked if they had the COVID-19 vaccine. And the clerk at the counters told her, yes, we have it, but you have to go online and set up an appointment. And you could see the bewilderment on this woman's face. Like, where do I even begin with that? And she walked away dejected and defeated. And I asked the clerk, do you all have a handout? Do you have a resource? Do you have a step-by-step to walk her through that? And all I got was blank stares. And so I think that people have this false sense of, I guess, success, and that, yes, we have it and it's available, but we're not really educating people on how to get it. And I think that's been a huge issue with the Black community getting the vaccine. I also think that it was not anticipated early on how much people would be fearful and how much people would be hesitant to get the vaccine. So it's almost like you have two competing issues. You have one part of the Black population who wants it but can't get it. You have another part of the population who is able to get it. I'm speaking of, I would say, mid-age to younger Black population who feel that it's just not safe enough. And so I think there also hasn't been enough done outside of social media to educate those populations.
You know, so I'd like to ask you ladies, as Black women medical professionals, what kind of policy and legislative changes could for, whether it's legislation or other kinds of policies, could start to change some of these kind of systemic problems that we're talking about, that limit, that create these issues that we're talking about. I mean, if it was your wish list, what would you want to see as Black doctors? Maybe Dr. Smash, can you take that first?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
I understand.
So as far as policies go, I'm going to say that it would be nice to see our local government, at least, come up with a strategy, just like Dr. Washington was talking about, come up with a strategy, and even Kimberly mentioned it, to help educate our community about, number one, how to use the internet services. And of course, in order to use the internet services so that they have access to things like the online scheduling program, but also having access to internet itself. And so if there was some sort of policy that required internet access to be available to those remote locations who currently don't have access to that, I think that would be awesome. And that would be a wonderful shot in the arm, since we're talking about vaccines. But it would be a great shot in the arm to help promote education and help promote health in the Black community.
Because the internet is actually a utility and it's not treated like that.
Well, and those are the answers that I think are so vital, because that's the systemic, people don't have access, so they can't get the information that they need, on and on. I mean, those are the kinds of things we all need to be thinking about. So that makes total sense to me. So what would be on your wish list, Dr. Washington?
Yeah, so in addition to access to things like online services, I also think allocation is important. So places like the Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health Center, which services a majority underrepresented population, making sure that a percentage of the vaccines go to that clinic, making sure that the patients who are being seen by the physicians there are able to administer those vaccines. And then another thing I'll say is we have to even go back even much farther than COVID-19, and we have to start with the pipeline. So Black patients overwhelmingly trust a doctor who looks like them. And in order to have doctors that look like them, we have to have more Black and brown people in medical school. And so I think one thing that the legislature has done, so I'll actually give them a pat on the back with this, is that there are programs in place. One of them being the Mississippi Rural Physician Scholarship Program that aims to put more underrepresented minorities and students from rural areas into medical school, because I think they're the front line. Again, no pun intended, but to have people Black and brown who are physicians and nurse practitioners on the front line who can educate the Black population about things like the vaccine, that's where we begin. But it has to start with those students being accepted and being entered into medical school.
Well, and I'd love you both to talk a little bit about, we've got this kind of new big push over Medicaid expansion at this moment, right? And so a lot of people hear that, and I think it gets split among, partisan lines and all those things. But I would love, Dr. Smash, talk a little bit. I mean, I don't know your position on Medicaid expansion, but tell us, what is access like, and just talk about, I don't know, what you think needs to be happening around this issue right now, really.
So I remember Medicaid expansion being mentioned back in, say, 2012. And I was so hopeful and so excited that patients that I knew and that I treated in places like the free clinic at Mission First in Jackson, patients like that who needed insurance could actually get it. And these are actually hardworking people who don't make enough or don't make little enough to actually qualify for Medicaid, and still don't make enough to actually afford insurance. And so there's this huge gap of people who don't have access to the care that they need on a regular basis because they're completely left out of the arena as far as insurance coverage is concerned. And so I think it's an important issue. I stand behind it, and I've stood behind it since 2012 when I first read about it. And my hope is that with all partisan issues aside, that people can see the need of the people and come together and make that happen.
What about you, Dr. Washington? Anything to add?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly stand behind it as well. And I think for me, one of the things that concerns me is that I think a lot of people have a one-sided view of Medicaid. So they think of people who are gaming the system. They think of people who don't want to work. They think of unwed mothers who have a number of children. And that's not all Medicaid does. A number of the patients that I treated who had rheumatologic illnesses were on Medicaid. Why? Because there is no way under God's heaven that those parents could have afforded to pay for the infusions that these children needed, the chemotherapy that these children needed. And I also think we have to put ourselves in other people's shoes. All of us are one tragedy away, one family member being sick away, one pandemic away from maybe even needing Medicaid. And I think if we put ourselves in someone else's shoes and we think about Medicaid like that, it's really a no-brainer because it could be you. And if it were you, you would want all the assistance and all the help that you deserved and needed.
Kimberly, you want
to? I think you guys kind of pick, as Dr. Washington said, everyone is one pandemic, one bad week, one bad car accident away from. And right now, I think these disparities are magnified because we go back to the Black church. The Black church is still vital. If this were flu season and that you could only get a flu shot by going online, then what people would do is after church, they would be in the fellowship hall and some young person would go on the computer for them and get the flu shot for them, right? But what has happened is you are so now disenfranchised from your community because you're poor and don't have proper internet, or because you're an elder and don't understand how it works. You're 5 steps away from your community. You haven't actually seen your pastor because you haven't. I mean, my dad ain't gonna stream Facebook church. That's just not what it's gonna do. And so I think it's interesting that these disparities are not only health disparities, they're community disparities.
Yeah. Well, and my sense is that's exactly what you guys are explaining, and in such a way that everybody needs to hear. Everybody in the state needs to hear this conversation because the way you've broken it down. And I can tell you, we really appreciate this. And there are a lot of people out there who are watching and commenting about how great the show is. I really encourage everybody to share this more so than any of the other shows that we've done so far, because you've shared so much vital information. I've learned a lot, I know, but I know our communities need to hear what you guys have said here tonight. We could probably go on for another couple of hours, but I can't tell you how much I know Kimberly and I appreciate both of you being here and talking about these issues in such just straightforward storytelling ways. So thank you so much, Dr. Smash. Thank you, Dr. Washington. I have a feeling we're going to try to get you guys back for part 2 at some point, especially as we kind of keep going through this process. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you. And I want to tell everybody about our next show next Thursday night at 6 p.m. Kimberly and I are going to be interviewing Michelle Duster, who is the great granddaughter of Ida B. Wells. And she has a wonderful book out right now. If you haven't seen it, you need to buy it. So she's going to be here with us, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of things. But journalism and activism and racial violence and all of these issues. So we're thrilled to have her here next week. And as we kind of continue our weekly Women's History Month run of MFP Live. Otherwise, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. If you can, please throw a few dollars in our tip jar. We are a nonprofit statewide media outlet, and we're at mfp.ms/donate. Or you could go straight to MississippiFreePress.org. Read all our stories, hit the donate button, throw a few dollars in if you can to help support our wonderful team. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you, Kimberly. And we will see all the rest of you next week. Please share this program. Thank you very much.